and welcome to my podcast, Empowerment, What's the Score? Today I'd like to welcome my guest, David Wheeler. He currently plays for Wycombe Wanderers. David, I'll get to you straight away. What does empowerment mean for you? I know it's a big question, but in general terms.
Yeah, I think it's when someone feels like they have license, whether that they feel like they've been given that to themselves, or if they've been given that by their boss or a leader or someone like that to fully express and explore who they are, and all their talents and what potential they have. I'd say the opposite of that is stifling someone, telling them what to do all the time, boxing them up, putting them in a corner, and not really fully accepting or appreciating someone in their entirety.
Right. I mean, obviously, in your football career, and it's well documented now, you've played in every league in England. I mean, obviously, bar the Premier League. So you, if anyone, knows about the pressures and so on and so forth associated with it. And you touched on it there, going empowerment, what you being stifled or what have you. And again, this is a big question, a wide question. How do you think that translates or doesn't translate in a football context? Being stifled, being told what to do, what not to do?
I think because the pressures of football, as you would remember, are very immediate and very short term, and can be very intense, or you can perceive them to be very intense, because obviously if you lose a game and you're getting booed off by your own fans, or if you're getting hauled in by the boss and asked what's going on, when you're going to put it right, these things can be very immediate. And I think that pressure, depending on how it's handled, can manifest in very, very different ways. And you can be top of the league and perceive that as a pressure, and you can be bottom of the league and perceive that as a pressure in almost the same way. So it's how you look at it, but I think it's how you respond. And if you're a manager and you say, right, the only way I can feel comfortable in this situation is if I feel like I'm in control of everything, and that includes being in control of what the players do outside of the football club as much as inside the football club, then I think then you get problems. I think you get issues where the players then have a very narrow idea of who they are, and you're creating a situation where a lot of players don't have a base, they don't have roots, where in case football isn't the thing anymore, whether that be for the moment, like they're injured or not involved, or if they get a career-ending injury, or if they're just out of contract and can't find a club, then it's like, oh, who am I now?
I mean, sorry to interrupt here. No, you've touched on a few points there. For younger players coming in to football, and this is a bit of a bugbear of mine, they're thrown into this system, and it's instant, it's immediate, and the mental pressures put on them are straight away and immense. And obviously, the higher up the tree they go. And I know it's getting better in terms of clubs providing mental support, but from your own experience of it, and when you started, what was it like, and what are the differences from today, really?
It's not really, in the men's game, it's not really improved a great deal in the last 20 or 30 years, I don't think. I think there's a bit of window dressing going on. I think there's a little bit here and there. There's maybe someone coming in once or twice a week. But real effective psychology, you need strong relationships to be built, and I think that's only going to happen if you're there every day, and you're only going to get the trust from the players, so much trust that they're going to come to you with, say, their darkest thoughts, or they're going to come to you in their most vulnerable moments. You know what footballers are like, especially male footballers. They're not going to do that, right, unless they trust you, and they're not going to trust you, I don't think, unless you're there every day and they're made to realise, oh, okay, this person, they're here because they want to help. That is their role.
Do you think it's just for a lot of clubs, because of a cost factor, they couldn't employ somebody full time, and B, it's just window dressing? Do you think they're ticking a box as far as it's concerned?
I think a lot, and this doesn't, I'm not intending this to sound patronising, but I think to a large extent, people in football, and I'm saying, you know, that's across the board, don't fully understand what sports psychology is. They don't fully understand the good that it can do, both on a mental health and a performance perspective. And that's clear when you get people in the game fulfilling that role that don't have the qualifications, because it takes about 7 years to qualify as a sports psychologist.
Oh, right, okay, right.
So it's like you have to have done the hard yards. And so I don't think people realise. So I think education's a big thing, and I think education for leadership, such as managers or owners, is a big deal.
Yeah. Do you think that's a starting point? But
possibly is a starting point. I mean, in my dissertation I did for my masters, that I was going.
I was just going to come on to that. So now you've touched it. Yep, fine. On you go.
You go back and I went back and forth a lot on what is the first step, what is the way forward. And I think. I think it's a human nature thing. You want a black and white answer a lot of the time, and life's so grey. I think it's both. I think it's education, be that for the PFA, the LMA, the FA, whatever. But I also think it's getting education into the training process for sports psychologists, because, as you know, the football environment is very, very different to your usual office environment or virtually any other environment. Yeah. So you put, say, like a young female sports psychologist who's only ever been in academia into a male football environment, they might get a shock. Yeah. So that needs to happen as well. But also, there's still, even now, this is getting better. Yeah, there's still a stigma. There's still a stigma about mental health in male professional sport. There's still a hesitancy to say, I'm really anxious about this game coming up, or I'm really depressed. Like, you just wouldn't hear that. No,
it's a case of man up and get on with it.
There's still a bit of that, I think, because I still feel like, from a physical perspective, if you're really struggling physically, and you're getting an injection or whatever to go out and play the game, there's still an element of pride in that. Yeah, you think, oh yeah, I'm a man. I'm going through the wall for my mates. Yeah. So I think there's still that difference, and I think there's still that. If you'd say broke your leg, everyone would be unquestionably sympathetic. I think if you had a mental breakdown, or if you were depressed and didn't want to get out of your bed, I think it would be like, come on, man, shake it off.
Do you think, that's a good point you raised there, do you think it comes from within the dressing room, that culture, or it's a wider thing within the football club, or football in general? I'm talking about the professional game, or the game in general.
I don't even think it's about the wider thing in the game in general. I think it's a wider thing as a societal
thing.
Yeah, I think male professional sport is more extreme, probably, than society. But in the wake of the BBC article that came out, I had people contacting me from say like the law profession or the PR profession, or.
But did you have any other football players contact you?
Yeah. But I had my own friends, some of my own friends, good friends, contacting me saying I had a really tough time. Yeah. I never said anything.
Right.
And I was like, wow, I did not expect that.
Right.
But I have all these people from different professions saying, oh, it's exactly like this in the advertising industry. It's exactly the same as this in the law industry. I was like, wow, okay.
Do you think then, is it one, getting or making provision for players to be able to come and speak to a friendly voice? So that's the first step. And secondly, once they've got that friendly voice that they can speak to, or person so they can speak to, is that friendly person being able to give them kind of advice or coping mechanisms to deal with the problems that they have?
That's definitely part of it. I think, like, I'm trying to think when you were saying before, the question you asked beforehand, the one we just had.
Well, talk about, younger players just starting out. I mean, that's the first stepping stone here, as to kind of two things. One, for the player, the advice you'd give to him or her, and two, advice to the clubs as to how they treat them.
Yeah. So when you mentioned culture before, there's like out of the 92 clubs in England, and Wales, like the cultures would be wildly different. So you'll have a relatively accepting culture in a few clubs.
Right, okay.
Most people feel comfortable to be who they are, and so that's probably a ripe environment for a psychologist to come into and really make a difference.
Is this in your experience? I mean,
this is in my experience, but obviously anecdotally from other players as well. But so that would be a ripe environment for a psychologist to come in and make a real big difference.
Okay, right.
But then there's other cultures which I personally experienced as well, where the psychologist would be almost like a pariah. They would be avoided like the plague, and they would not be championed by the manager. They would be sectioned off in a room upstairs somewhere where you could go and see them if you wanted, but it wasn't encouraged. And in that type of environment, you've probably got sexism going on, you've probably got homophobia going on, you've probably got elements of racism going on.
All the worst elements in human nature.
Yeah. But jokey banter going on.
But how do you change that in certain clubs then? Because you know yourself, there's always a high turnover of players, coaches and managers. You're lucky if you last 3 years at a club as a player, and a coach, manager, it's even less. So surely, where does the culture start, or how does the culture start then in a club like that? And how do you, if it's a bad one, how do you end it then?
So this is, I mean, in the word leadership, but that is, like you say, if you've got leadership coming from the manager, that could only last, a few months, a year, whatever. So leadership in the broad sense, in terms of director of football, the owner, the board. Yeah. I mean, recently, Southampton Football Club come out with their halo effect, which was like their sort of overarching.
Oh, right. Okay.
It was like their overarching sort of view of where they wanted to see the club go, and a lot of that was there was a sustainability involved in that. A lot of that was the community aspect of the club. But there's no reason why that can't be, and I'm sure it is, part of some clubs' long-term strategy, not just on the philosophy of how they're going to play on the pitch, but the philosophy of what culture they want to create off the pitch. And that's something it can take not that long. Yeah. If you're putting in some really strict structures and red lines in early on in terms of standards and how you have to behave, and if you're given license by the ownership, the board, the owners to say, look, if you're not happy with how certain players are behaving, doesn't matter how good they are, they're not staying very long. They'll go in the next transfer window. And we're not only going to recruit on how good they are on the pitch, we're going to recruit human beings. We're going to recruit players that are going to be ambassadors and are going to be a benefit to the club long term off the pitch as well as on it.
Yeah, I mean, I take your point there, and it's a good one. But my query, though, my trouble with this is that with clubs, their culture or their mindset is so short term that it's, well, you know yourself, is win at almost every cost, and nothing else is taken into consideration. And if you don't buy into that and you don't follow the trends for that, then get out the door. How do you change? I mean, there might not be an answer to it, but how do you even attempt to go around that?
Yeah, well, the thing is, it depends what we're talking about. If we're talking about mental health psychology provision, if that's what we're talking about, then it's like politics. Are you looking at it from grassroots, or are you looking at it from grassroots up or top down? Like, which way are you looking at it? And is it one or the other, or is it both? I mean, if you're looking at it from a political point of view, it's usually the biggest change is usually bottom up. It's usually from
grassroots up,
direct action. That sort of thing is the biggest change is made. But I think in the football terms of things, like we've seen more and more recently, especially with people like Marcus Rashford, that footballers, especially the top players, have a hell of a lot of power to like instigate change. And it would only take a pretty sort of small groundswell of high profile, even semi high profile players to get together and go to the PFA and say, no, look, we want psychologists in our club. Make it a mandatory thing. Because at the end of the day, like, it's only going to benefit the players, and for me personally, it will not that they'll see it necessarily initially, or even in the long term, they might not even want to acknowledge that it's had an effect. But it will benefit the performances on the pitch. It will benefit the players, but also how they play. Because if you're stressed in your life and you're in crisis, it's unlikely you're going to play consistently well on the pitch.
Do you not think, and again, you can tell me better here, it's happening to an extent at the top of the tree in English football, in the Premier League, because they've got the money to spend and really go into it in depth, and added to the fact that they're getting players from all over the world with different cultures, different mindsets, not the British, mindset that they have to adapt.
I think, that's a good point. I think there's Premier League clubs. I think it's almost we might as well. We got the money. We may as well. We may as well tick all boxes. We may as well cover all bases. Like why wouldn't we?
So you think it's just a box ticking exercise, or they're actually genuinely trying to change a culture?
I think the best clubs, and I think most clubs in the Premier League now, they have to try and be the best clubs just to survive. But I think the top ones, say your Liverpools, your Man Cities, they're going to be looking for an inch of an edge all the time in every aspect. And so I think they're doing that I think they're doing it for performance edge. But with the added benefit of mental health, good mental health for their players. So I think that is that is a good point. But I would say that I think it was it might be Davide Ancelotti, Carlo Ancelotti's son.
Oh, right.
He come out recently and said that he thinks we're going the way of every player will have their own psychologist. And this is the other issue, is that the top Prem players, or even any Prem player, could feasibly have their own psychologist. It's the players in the Championship, it's the players in League One, League Two, the Conference, that they can't afford to do that.
No.
So whose responsibility is it ultimately to look after those players? Should really be the clubs. But if the clubs aren't willing to do that, then
Do you think the PFA's got a role to play here?
Well, the argument is that the PFA are doing a job. They are doing a job. They've got a counselling service. They have a link with the Sporting Chance Clinic. They do a job. Right. But I think from a distance, it's very difficult, to be fair to the PFA, to do more practically than what they currently do. I think...
Is that a manpower issue or finance or
no,
a combination of two?
I just don't think they have the power to really mandate the clubs to do anything. Yeah. I think it's more going to be... It will be the FA ultimately that have the power to do it, or the EFL. Mm-hmm. But the PFA can play a role in supporting players to demand that change. Yeah, I think that's the route that it takes.
I mean, I touched on it earlier about younger players coming into the game, and this is a big thing for me. They're thrust into this world at a young age, and they have to give up everything for football to be able to succeed in it. How would you advise them, with the benefit of your experience and knowing what you know and the pressures, etc., placed on them, to be able to succeed in the game and have a life or a mental life that doesn't overtake them?
It's probably easy for me to say because I've had a career now. However, I was at Brighton as a young lad from sort of 10 to 16. I got released at 16, and at the time it felt like everything to be a Brighton player. I mean, it didn't help being in Sussex because it's the only club in Sussex. Well, obviously Crawley, but back then Crawley was a non-league club. Yeah. So it felt like everything, and my family supported Brighton, friends supported Brighton, and it was the club. Mm-hmm. And so the pressure that I felt, even though no one was really giving me any pressure
within the club,
I didn't. Well, not so much within the club necessarily, but my family weren't giving me pressure.
Yeah, they were right. Fine,
like good. Not direct pressure at all. Mm-hmm. They, relatively often would say, if you don't want to do it anymore, if you're not enjoying it, you don't have to do it. Despite being like big sports people. Yeah. But I would say also that they did always advocate for me to carry on my education at the same time. And I remember there's actually a story that just popped into my head. So I was 16 years old, and I had GCSE exams coming up. I had an exam on Wednesday morning about 9 a.m. I think it must have been. Right. Like quite an important exam, a GCSE exam. And I had a call from I don't know if it's the director of football or the manager of the under-18s or something, saying, or they said I've been selected to go with the under-18s for the FA Youth Cup game on the Tuesday night, but it's away at Bristol City at Ashton Gate. Oh right, okay. And they didn't speak to me; they spoke to my mum, because obviously they need my mum and dad's permission because I was 16. Yeah. And I would have had to miss school the day before. And my mum said, "Oh well, is he going to play?" And
fair enough question.
Fair enough question. And they said, and I'm pretty so this is trying to remember. They said to her, "Oh, does he want to be a professional footballer?" And my mum said, "Well, yeah, of course, but he's got a GCSE exam in the morning. I don't want him to be knackered. Yeah. But if he's going to play, and that would be a huge thing for him to do, then of course, I'm happy for him to go." And they're like, "Well, if he wants to be a professional footballer." So obviously I ended up going because I did want to be a professional footballer, and I felt that pressure to go. Yeah, tell me you played. And I sat in the stand. I wasn't even on the bench. And and this may sound like surprising, but I didn't even realise that was a thing. At 16 years old, I don't think I really realised that sitting in the stand was something that players did or had to do. Probably because it never happened to me up until that point. Right, okay. And so I got told when I got there in the changing room that I was in the stand. Right. And I had no idea what to do. So I said to the coach, can I do the warm-up? So he said, yeah, you can do the warm-up. Of course you can. So I went and did the warm-up, come in, had a shower. The lads were about to go out, so I was like, right, what do I do now? So I knew some of the dads of the other lads, so I was like, I'll just go and sit in the stand with them. So I did that, got home early hours in the morning, and then had my exam at 9 a.m. And then got released a few months later.
Did you have any warning of that coming up, or it was just called in one day, bang, get out the door?
It was a complete shock. So there was only a few lads from the 16s that actually played for the under-18s that year, and I was one of them. And they signed 8 lads, and probably only 4 of them had played for the under-18s in any capacity. So I was completely shocked.
Did they tell you why you weren't?
To be honest, when I got told, it was just like everything else after that I didn't hear because I was in shock. Yeah. Because I think it was the first time really in my whole life that I'd had rejection in football. Yeah. And everything else had been smooth sailing up until that point. Yeah.
But you know what, this is a really good point you're touching on, David. That story and that lead up to the axe falling happens to thousands and thousands of boys.
The vast majority, yeah.
I mean, I think actually the BBC have done some figures on it, and it's like 12 or 13,000 players each year. And of them, less than 100 or just over 100 make it. So you've got thousands of boys that don't make it, and they're facing the same thing that you face every single year. How do you cope with it?
Well, the other fascinating part of that is that I ended up going to my local hometown club, Lewes, who were decent, step 2 at the time in Conference South. Yeah. Decent level club, and I was joined the under-18s there, and my confidence was on the floor. And so I was just a coach who also coached at Brighton said, "Come along and just come and play, just come and enjoy yourself." So I did that, and probably saved me in terms of my career, right? Just because I was enjoying football again and realising actually I can play. I'm a good player. Yeah.
But you didn't have anything else to fall back on, did you?
Well, at the time it was literally I hadn't even countenanced doing any other job in the future. I did fairly well at school. I was doing my GCSEs and stuff, but I hadn't thought of doing anything else.
Yeah. You're one of the lucky ones because academically you're clever, you're smart.
Yeah, but that wasn't always the case. Right. Okay. That was probably quite a late thing. I did well in GCSEs, but that was to a large extent due to my friendship group. Yeah. In the early part of secondary school, I wasn't particularly smart academically. But yeah, the interesting thing about that is that coach who took me to Lewes, later on, I asked him, Did you know why I got released? And he said, well, I think one of the things was the way you behaved when you got taken to Bristol City. I was like, what? He said, yeah, well, I said, you didn't you didn't come and stay a part of the group, come on the bench and go in at half time to see the lads. You just sort of took yourself off into the stand. And I was like, wow. So I was, and I've obviously reflected on this since, and I was like, I was a 16-year-old lad. Yeah. My parents weren't there because they were working, so I went with the other lads' dads. Yeah. I was on my own. I didn't know how to behave because it had never happened to me. I wasn't told how to behave. No. I'd just had probably one of the biggest rejections I've had in football, and then subsequently that became a black mark against my name in the decision whether to give me basically a scholarship at YTS, which could have been what made or broke my career. Yeah. I mean that brings me on to that, and again I touched on this about coping mechanisms or lack of, particularly for younger players, because they don't have the experience or the knowledge at that point. And how do we reverse this? I don't know. I don't have the answer for that. Well, I feel like so we spoke about men's football earlier. I feel like in academy football, it has taken huge strides compared to the men's game. They've mandated sports psychologists now.
All right, okay.
For Category 1.
I was going to say, is that just Cat 1 clubs, but not...
Cat 1, not throughout, but for Cat 1 clubs, which is a big deal. It was still a big deal.
Yeah.
It's still great. But, so that hopefully will progress and be rolled out across the board. And I do think young people are much better at this than our generations are. They're getting much better in terms of being open and willing to speak about these things.
Do you not think, though, everyone has to buy into it? I don't mean just the players. I mean the coaches.
Definitely.
Because if they, and I might be painting them in a bad light here, that if they hear or see that players are going to speak to psychologists, is there a black mark against them?
No, yeah, well, that's a huge.
That's another story.
It's a huge thing, yeah. It's and that comes back to what we were
talking about.
Is about education.
Yeah,
because
so it's not just the players.
It's not just the players, absolutely not. And you know, in some ways, it's worse. The staff's a worse situation because most of them are ex-players, so they're carrying over that.
Yeah,
and that's something else I spoke about in my dissertation. Was there's this generational hangover from previous ways of being.
Yeah, I had it in my day, so you're getting it in your day.
Exactly, and sometimes not as overt as that. Just, well, I didn't need it.
Yeah, man up.
Yeah, I didn't need it. Yeah. So it's like it doesn't even necessarily need to be hostile. It's just the fact that they don't promote it is also a problem, because it's like, okay, so by him saying, "Oh, I didn't need it," you can have it, but I didn't need it. It's sort of like almost a passive aggressive type thing to say. Which is just like, no, you say, "I didn't have it, but we've got this now for you, so make the most of it, like benefit from it."
Yeah. I mean, we're talking. That's a good point. We're talking about older players giving the benefit or not of their experience. If you could meet your younger self now, the young boy that was rejected or about to be, what advice would you give him?
So I suffered quite badly from anxiety when I was younger. And it was very much sport related anxiety, and I seem to actually be worse with athletics than I was with football.
Oh, did you take part in athletics as well? So
yeah, not to any serious level.
Yeah.
I mean, I did pretty well at a high jump, when I was younger, but then in sprinting I was decent, but I was never top level.
By anxiety, in what way did it get you?
Oh, like just felt at times like blind fear. As soon as I woke up on the morning of a game or a race, it would be like gripped with fear, and then not feeling able to eat anything beforehand, being sick beforehand.
Did you speak to anybody?
Sometimes multiple times as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it was like the sign of the times or. Like, because I'm not old, but I'm not young either.
No.
And so I think my mum went through a similar thing, and I think it was almost like I was just like, well, this is just me. This is just part of my personality, and I've just got to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And it got to a situation where when I was about 18, it was leaking into my other parts of my life. So it started being a sports related thing. Yeah. And then I started having panic attacks in a restaurant, having a meal, or going to a shopping mall. I'd start getting clammy hands and feeling my heart was racing. Right. Getting on a train, I was starting feeling edgy about it.
So what had taken part, or the pressure and stresses you were feeling in football, was starting to seep into every part of your life?
I think it was just not. It it was feeling like the thoughts or the feelings that I was having, I needed to get rid of. I needed to. This was wrong. Right. I needed to get rid of this. Yeah. Wherever that come from, I don't know. But I was like, I need to get rid of this. And by having that mindset, I made it worse. And so after, like, subsequently from that, and I think it's multifaceted how I got to where I am now in terms of dealing with that anxiety and that stress. It was a lot of it was building a bigger personality of who I was, because when I was a young person, I was the sportsman. I was the footballer. It was David Wheeler, the footballer, the sportsman. That was all I was known for, really, and it was nothing else. So it was trying to take the shackles off where that was concerned. Yeah. It was also going to seek help and get counselling.
You recognised this internally? You thought, I need...
Well, I got to the point where I realised that I was going to have a chance of actually having a career in the game. Yeah. But realised that this was probably going to be one of the main things that was going to hold me back. And so I was like, I need to deal with this now, because I will regret it if I don't try.
I mean, the fact that you've been able to recognise that, I mean, what age was that around?
So that was when I signed for Exeter, so I was 21. Yeah. And I realised that I was good enough physically to be a professional footballer, and I had some skill, and I could do it, but I was sometimes going into games having been sick and not eating anything, and, you know, getting to 55, 60 minutes and not being able to go anymore.
I mean, I recognise it myself because I've seen it happen. I think if you had to take this, and I'm maybe thinking a career after football, into any club, professional club, up and down the UK, every single player would recognise that in some way, shape or form. Mm.
And it's one of those things where, so it was very normal for me because I'd had it from such a young age. But some people can be fine into their 20s, and then it can start rearing its head. And I think it was for me, it was rooted in a fundamental fear of failure, but it was also a threat to who I was, because if I failed at this, that was also me failing as a person.
Do you think it could have, if you hadn't addressed it, and this is just hypothetical here, it could have got to a stage where it could have been dangerous?
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. I think part of it was feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And I was very lucky that for whatever reason, I think maybe the morals and values that I had from my mum and dad, something innate in me. Yeah. I never, no matter how bad it got, and sometimes it was really bad. But sometimes I'm talking like being sick 4 or 5 times before doing something. Yeah. I still did it, whatever it was. I always did it. Yeah. And it was sticking to what I believed in and sticking to what my values were. Yeah. And coincidentally, that was part of a theory that I learned at university called acceptance and commitment therapy and mindfulness. And it's about accepting the feelings and the thoughts that you have, and they're not abnormal.
I mean, that's a really good point, David, because I was thinking there, the feelings you were getting at that age and being physically sick, I think many players put that off and buried it, and then it rose its head again at the end of their career in another way. Mm.
Well, I think like to take it to sort of a more general area, most people that have like a set piece speech they have to do, or even just to stand up in front of a group of kids and talk is not easy sometimes. No. Like, people are terrified of that. Yeah. And they wouldn't have had necessarily any other experiences of anxiety in their life. No. But any thought of doing a speech is terrifying. Yeah. So it's a parallel there with what I ended up doing. Was I was trying to understand it from a academic point of view, and that helped a lot. So I read books, and then I did my degree, and I learned more, and then as I went, I was learning more and more and more, and understanding why it was I was feeling like that. So then it became not something that was part of me. It was something that I could shift, and I could move, and I could adapt. And then it was, I'm going to play these League Two games. I'm going to play them regardless, and that's going to become normal.
Do you think, getting back to your theme here, that is what empowered you? If you hadn't addressed it at that age, or A, recognised it, and B, how do I cope and deal with it? What do I need to do to sort it? My career would not have gone on. So, I'm putting words in your mouth here, but was that your empowerment? That's what empowered you to get on in your career?
I think I feel empowered now. And I feel empowered now because I feel quite content with what I've achieved, despite also being ambitious that I want to keep achieving. But I know now that there's a path to going from quite a serious situation. Yeah. And there are worse situations than me. Obviously, there's people that take their own lives. Yeah. But I know there's a path away out from that, and to a place where, I love my life now, and I don't have the same thoughts, I don't have the same experiences like I used to, and I loved my life back then, but there were difficulties with that anxiety. So the empowerment I feel now is, I know there's a path to a better life and a more fulfilling life, and perhaps the more empowering thing for me is, hopefully in the future, either as a sports psychologist or a manager, which is the career path that I'm looking at, is I can help people also follow that path.
David, I think that's a great point that you finish on there. I think that's the perfect point to finish this podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you and hearing about your story.